The fantasy football world is still reeling from the shocking performances in Week 1, and one thing is clear. The impact of offensive coordinator departures cannot be overstated. The Detroit Lions, once a high-octane machine, looked toothless without Ben Johnson at the helm. Jared Goff's performance was lackluster, to say the least, and it's hard not to wonder if he's still relying on the plays that worked in the past. The question on everyone's mind is, can Dan Campbell step up and fill the void left by Johnson, or is he in over his head? But here's where it gets interesting. What if the Packers' defense is actually the real deal? Maybe, just maybe, their dominant performance was not just a fluke. However, I'm not buying it just yet, and I think it's too early to crown them as the top defense in the league. The Lions' offense, on the other hand, is a cause for concern, and if you have them on your roster, you should be worried. And numbers don't lie. 246 yards of total offense is a far cry from their average of 409 yards in 2024. And let's not forget Jahmyr Gibbs' underwhelming performance, with 10 catches for a mere 31 yards. The other team that lost an offensive guru is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they looked only marginally better than the Lions. Baker Mayfield's performance was disappointing, to say the least, and it's hard to see them as a top offense without their former coordinator. But what does this mean for fantasy owners? Should you be panicking if you have Lions or Bucs players on your roster? Not just yet, but it's definitely time to adjust your expectations. Maybe David Montgomery isn't a running back 2 after all, and maybe Jameson Williams isn't a surefire start in flex formats. And as for Mayfield, he might be headed back to the QB streaming pool. The Giants versus Commanders game was a different story altogether, with Jacory Bill Croskey-Merritt putting on a show with 10 carries for 82 yards and a touchdown. It just goes to show that sometimes you have to take a chance on a player, even if the process doesn't always make sense. And this is the part most people miss. The Commanders' backfield was a mystery all summer, and it looks like they were just trying to keep us guessing. The Ravens versus Bills game was an epic battle, with Josh Allen making the most of his limited wide receiver core. It's incredible to think that he can still perform at such a high level despite the lack of talent around him. And Derrick Henry? He's still the king of the running backs, with 3 30-yard-plus runs in a single game. But what about the Steelers versus Jets game? Justin Fields looked like a premium QB pick, and Garrett Wilson was fully engaged and productive. Breece Hall was a steal in draft season, and he proved it with over 100 rushing yards. A Jets offensive line looks solid, and Aaron Rodgers was his usual professional self. The Texans versus Rams game was a disappointment for C.J. Stroud, who just couldn't get anything going with Nico Collins. But on the other side of the ball, Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams looked heroic, with Nacua putting up 23 PPR points. The Panthers versus Jaguars game raised some questions about Bryce Young's late-season performance, and it looks like it might have been a mirage. Chuba Hubbard managers got a garbage time score, but it's hard to see him as a reliable option. And what about Trevor Lawrence? He's all prototype, but the production just isn't there. The Cardinals versus Saints game was a bright spot for Juwan Johnson, who had a productive season with 8 catches for 76 yards. But the rest of the game was a snooze fest, with neither team really standing out. The Raiders versus Patriots game saw Drake May put up some volume, but it's hard to see him as a Konami Code QB just yet. Kayshon Boutte had a solid game, and Mike Vrabel's coaching was impressive. The Dolphins versus Colts game was a tale of two elevators, with the Colts soaring and the Dolphins plummeting. It's time to adjust the ranks and move the Colts up, while the Dolphins are headed in the opposite direction. The Niners versus Seahawks game was a disappointment for fantasy players, with Christian McCaffrey getting a ton of volume, but George Kittle getting knocked out early. Jackson Smith-Njigba was a clear number 1 wide receiver, but the backfield was a committee. The Bengals versus Browns game was a brutal passing day for the Bengals, with Joe Burrow putting up a mere 113 passing yards, but the Browns gave it away, and Dylan Sampson's receiving out of the backfield was impressive. The Buccaneers versus Falcons game saw Baker Mayfield put up a concerning performance, with only 6 targets for Emeka Egbuka. but 2 of his 4 catches went for scores. So maybe there's still hope. And what about Michael Penix? He looked good, but he needs Drake London to stay healthy. The fantasy football world is full of questions, and it's up to us to find the answers. So, what do you think? Are the Lions and Bucs offenses doomed without their former coordinators? Should you be panicking if you have players on these teams? Let us know in the comments. And this is the part where we ask, what's your take on the current state of fantasy football? Do you think the offense is more important than the defense or vice versa? Share your thoughts, and let's get the conversation started.